I am a reading specialist, which also has given me, I think, a little bit of an interesting perspective because since I work with kids in grades 4K through fifth, I have had the opportunity to sit in on both face to face classes and virtual classes for all of them. And I think the one thing that I want to stress to you so much is that there are no stupid questions. So, Christina, can you go to the first slide? Thanks. So, even though for many of us, this virtual landscape has been going on for what feels like forever, it's really only been a couple of months. And because it's so new, we are so understanding as teachers. And in my case, too, having done all of these different situations, I can certainly vouch for the fact that this is not easy. And as was referenced before, this is a balancing act. We understand that just like you, we're trying to work from home and trying to find the right amount of everything to give our kids and our work and our families. And it's not an easy thing to do. So, one of the things that I think a lot of us have tried as teachers not to do is make assumptions about what families do or don't already know about parenting or virtual learning or learning in general. But in some cases, what I'm finding is that either we're giving too much information and we're making families feel as though we're belittling them by assuming that they don't know how to parent or how to handle this particular situation. And in some cases, we're going the opposite way. And so if you don't tell us, we really don't know if you're getting just the right amount of information. The same goes for advice in terms of some of the things we've heard about tonight, how to handle behavior situations, how to handle organizing situations. These are things that happen so naturally throughout the course of the day that we recognize that this is new for you too. So if you're not getting what you need and you need things beyond just the typical learning kinds of questions, when we are with your children, we are also parenting, we are also problem solving, we are handling everything from kids that are picky eaters to kids that aren't able to zip their jackets to kids that are feeling socially isolated to kids that are being bullied. And we understand that amongst siblings and neighbors and daycare, those are things that happen at home. So outside of the things that you might think of as typical academic related questions, we can also help you with advice and support in those areas too. So let us know if you need anything beyond this. This has to be a partnership because we can't do it alone. One of the things that I think a lot of us have realized is that a part of face to face learning that is so critical and that is largely absent from the virtual setting is the constant, ongoing, and immediate feedback that teachers are able to provide students throughout the day in the classroom. That doesn't mean that we're sitting with any one child for 10, 20 minutes at a time, sometimes, but it's more of an ongoing when we have these little ones in the classroom. We see them in so many different settings. And when we don't have the ability to continually reinforce and model and monitor student learning and behavior, we really have to rely on families and caregivers to fill in those gaps with us. So if there are supports that you need potentially outside of the school in order to do that, please let us know. In terms of questions, one other thing that I want to add, when I say there's no stupid questions, I really mean the most basic things. I've had families ask everything from how do I get my child out of bed in the morning to how do I turn my microphone on? We have lots of caregivers that are grandparents or caregivers that don't speak the same language. We have access to interpreters and all kinds of resources that we can use to help you. We are not judging because as parents, we've been in these situations ourselves where we see an email from a parent. I had someone ask me just this week, and this is a phrase that I've been using since September. Finally, the parent said, "What do you mean by writing paper?" Because I had sent home a number of different types of paper, and I realized, oh gosh, to me, it was so obvious, and to them, they had no idea what I was talking about, and that was my own fault. But I wouldn't have known unless they had asked the question. So, Christina, next slide. I really hope that parents then will ask me some of these things. And this gets back to the fact that unless sometimes you communicate with us, we might be assuming that you know these things, not because we want to make you feel silly, but because we also don't want to underestimate your knowledge and your parenting ability and make anybody feel bad that we're giving you information that, might seem overkill, I guess. But it really is good for you to let us know if something needs to change. This year, in addition to my other roles, I'm also teaching all of the virtual kindergartners for my district. And it's been quite a while since I was a classroom teacher. So this is new to me. If your family is getting too much or too little homework, we won't know that unless you let us know. And a lot of times, what I'm finding is families, in an effort to maybe kind of please the teacher, or if they feel like it's too much work, they don't necessarily want to speak up because they feel like their child might be doing something wrong. It's all relative right now, again, because this is new for everyone. What might be working for your child might not be working for somebody else. In terms of what resources does your family need, this is not just resources such as technology, which I'll come back to in a minute, but we have a lot of situations I'm finding, and you may be in one of these, where we have children that are going between multiple homes. So they have, either a split family, or they have multiple caregivers, or they're going back and forth between whoever's watching them during the day and so on. And in doing so, are having a very difficult time managing all of their materials and supplies. So probably in an ideal world, you would have a large backpack or crate or some kind of, I have a couple families that we suggested to them to simply get a suitcase with wheels, and everything goes in the suitcase because it's usually big enough that the child himself or herself can throw everything in there on their own. But if that's not an option, and you need to have resources kept in multiple homes, if there's one thing that I've noticed, this has certainly brought out the most challenging communication systems between parents that maybe were struggling to co-parent prior to COVID. So in that case, if it's just too difficult for you to manage, again, we're not judging. If you need duplicates of school supplies or materials, if you simply don't have the crayons, notebooks, whatever, that you might have otherwise gotten if you came to school on the first day and the school noticed that your child didn't have XYZ and would have provided those things, it's never too late to ask to get those extra things to have at home. One question that I know most educators like to be asked when these kiddos are getting to be a little bit older and they're trying to manage their own time, they really have no idea sometimes what time and when they're supposed to be logged in. So if you want to know immediately because there's a behavior or a safety concern that your child hasn't logged in, please go ahead and let us know. If you have a question too about a correction or late work or missing assignment policy, those things are very different in the virtual world. So please ask if you don't know. Teachers are also always wondering, are your students benefiting from the virtual lessons? Because again, this is so new, and what we think is working might not be. So we would love to know what kinds of changes you're observing in your child in case we've overlooked something. And along with that is the attendance piece. Make sure that you ask and understand the attendance policy. Different schools, teachers, classes are taking attendance in different ways, depending on whether it's for half day, a whole day, an individual class, or whatever the case may be. And in some cases, it varies from teacher to teacher. So if you want to know whether or not your child's going to be marked absent or tardy or, God forbid, truant, those are all things that you're going to want to know and ask and make sure you understand if you don't. Next slide, please. And then finally, what educators need from caregivers. So we really need you to do as much as you can to set your student up for success. And here is what that looks like. There's some different examples that have already been given in terms of having an organized space. but it's really critically important that that workspace is quiet. I have had students that have been logging in from the car. I completely understand that sometimes that's a necessity, but when there are screaming siblings in the background, when the TV's on in the background, um, if you can get headphones, and a lot of times the school can provide those things. But the other thing to remember is that if your student has headphones on, they maybe are drowning out the background noise, but we aren't necessarily. So for the sake of the other learners, that's really helpful. The other thing to keep in mind is in terms of materials, if you have a younger learner, not only should they have those materials close at hand, but they really need to have them actually laid out in front of them. Sorry about my background noise. The other thing in terms of assignments and time is that we're really asking these little kids to behave as though they're middle school students. Sometimes they're logging in multiple times a day. They're managing different teachers. They have different assignments and different work that's coming from multiple places. Some schools are sending paper and pencil. Some are doing everything online. Some teachers are using different online learning platforms. And because they're not typically expected to do quite that much virtual management in a regular classroom face-to-face setting, they really need you, at least in the initial stages when the schedule changes, to help them set up that routine and know what time it is and those kinds of things. In terms of getting appropriate technology, if you don't have a working iPad, Chromebook, microphone, charging cord, whatever it is, if and when you need a new one, it often will go faster if you, as the caregiver, make the phone call or make the request to have it fixed or to get it replaced or have something new. I've heard this time and time again that our tech support staff are completely overwhelmed. And so there are things that unfortunately get pushed to the bottom of the to-do list. And so if you need help with supplying your child with internet access or whatever it may be, a lot of schools are offering those safe spaces, but they're also offering replacement pieces and so on. And if you're the one that does the advocacy, if you're able to, it often will go faster in ensuring that your student gets what they need. Lastly, we really need you to provide your student with daily reading practice, regardless of how old they are. And what that looks like depends on the age. So it might be that they're looking at the pictures and storytelling their books, or it might be that they're reading to a sibling or a pet, or it might be that they're reading for a sustained amount of time. If you don't know how to manage the assignments, if you're feeling overwhelmed, this is always something that you can confidently go back to and feel like, you know what, my student got something out of today. If you sit down and do your bedtime reading, if you have siblings read to each other, regardless of what that looks like and depending on the age, if you just can't get your child to focus on a screen for 5 more minutes, you can always fall back on looking at books. And there again, the school can provide you with those, and local libraries are almost all, from what I am aware, doing curbside pickup. At the end of all of this, understanding that teachers are so overwhelmed as well. And those of us that are doing multiple schedules and multiple settings, we have lots of training as educators, but never in a million years were we prepared for this. And any of you that are potentially working from home are in the same boat as we are. And so we really need your grace and your patience and your support. And as much as you can be empathetic to the fact that we are all, you and I and all the other educators included, trying to do the very best we can, and keeping in the back of your mind that we want the best for your child just like you do. We may not know the very best way to do it, but together I am absolutely confident that we can continue to figure it out. So thank you.